Financial freedom means different things to different people. For some, it's retiring early. For others, it's simply having more control over their time. In this video, we're going to explore how Bitcoin as an asset class has performed over the past decade and how tools like Reverse CAGR can help you model what's realistically possible over the long term. We'll compare Bitcoin with more traditional assets like gold and the S&P 500 and walk through how to use a Reverse CAGR calculator to project potential future values. No hype, just data, maths, and perspective. Hello YouTube and welcome back to the Bitcoin Briefing, your in-depth dive into Bitcoin price action, market insights and news, all focused exclusively on Bitcoin. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss an update, and let's jump straight into it.
In my last video, I presented this website called casebitcoin.com, which gives Bitcoin's historical performance against gold and the S&P 500. And this table presents the return on investment over the past 14 years. And you can see that Bitcoin vastly outperforms gold and the S&P 500. But what today's video is talking about is going to be the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate. Now this measures Bitcoin's performance year on year to gold and S&P 500. So if you had Bitcoin and you held it for 3 years, you'd be up 56% every year. So you'd be 56% in year 1, 56% in year 2, and 56% in year 3. And you can see that the lowest value of Bitcoin in terms of CAGR has been 31% if you held it for 4 years. Now compare that to gold, where if you held gold for 4 years, you'd be up 15% in year 1, 15% in year 2, and so on. But what if we considered that theory in reverse? Reverse CAGR does the opposite. If you know the average annual return and your time period, it tells you the final value your investment could reach. And this is how you can exponentially grow your wealth with Bitcoin's historical CAGR rate. Now, in order to do this, I've created this simple reverse CAGR calculator, which uses the reverse CAGR formula. So the ending value, or what your portfolio will be worth at the end of a specific period of time, is equal to the beginning value, so your initial investment, times by 1 plus the CAGR rate to the power of years. So again, the time you've held it for. So I've simply copied over the table from casebitcoin.com listing the CAGR rates for Bitcoin, gold, and the S&P 500. So let's set a beginning value or an initial investment of £1,000. We'll make it nice and easy. Or this could be $1,000, as that's typically quite easy for a lot of people to achieve. Now let's pick the CAGR rate. Now let's start with the best return that the S&P 500 has ever produced in a year. And we can see that that's 17% if you hold it for 2 years. So let's set 17% in this box here. Investment period. Now this will assume that the S&P 500 is returning 17% every year for the next, let's say, 10 years. And you can see that the final value is 4,806.83. So about a 400% return, which is pretty good. But when you consider inflation and factor that in, it's actually not that great at all. So let's copy this number over into this box here, as we're going to be comparing the return now to gold's best ever CAGR rate. And you can see that's 43%. So again, we'll assume that gold performs at 43% every year for the next 10 years. And you can see that's 35,756. And so once again, let's copy this number into this box. And therefore we can do a simple subtraction and show that holding gold at its best ever CAGR rate at 43% as opposed to the S&P 500 at its best ever CAGR rate 17% gives you £30,950 and 11p more for 10 years of investment period. Now let's look at Bitcoin and really see the exponential increase that your wealth could have generated over that same period of time. So let's look at Bitcoin's best ever historical performance and CAGR rate. 115%. Let's put that in this box here. And immediately you can see that if you held Bitcoin for 10 years and its CAGR rate was 115%, which is what it did for 13 years, you would have £2,110,496 and 32p. Now that is the monumental difference in Bitcoin returns as opposed to gold and the S&P 500, and that's why it has been the best performing asset of all time. Now let's look at that visually. So this sheet calculates the value of a portfolio at every year for a set period of time given an input CAGR rate. So in this specific example, I've chosen a 20-year time frame, and Well, let's input the CAGR rate from the S&P 500 as per we previously did, so 17%. Let's put our initial investment in there, £1,000. And you can see that at the end of 20 years, that £1,000 would have turned into 23,105. And you can see the exponential curve given by our compound interest calculation and formula that we showed on the previous sheet. Now let's move on to gold. So again, we'll put in our £1,000 of initial investment. We'll put in our CAGR rate of 43%. And you can see that our £1,000 after 20 years at that CAGR rate gives us £1,278,558. And you can see the direct comparison visually between the S&P 500 return and the returns of gold. And again, really look at that exponential curve. The longer the time period, just because the formula dictates that it's to the power of time, the higher the output and the higher the value at the end of that time. Now let's look at Bitcoin. Let's put our £1,000 in our initial investment and let's put in our CAGR rate of 115%. And you can see that our £1,000 at the start of that period at the end of 20 years is 4,454,194,715 pounds and 28p. And you can see that the exponential curve and the derivative or the rate of change of that is absolutely massive compared to gold and the S&P 500, which is why it's really important to be hodling and keeping this asset for a long period of time and have a high time horizon. Now, you may be thinking that 115% CAGR for Bitcoin for the next 20 years is optimistic. So let's make a more pessimistic approach and use the average rate of Bitcoin for the past 4 years of about 50% as our rate. Let's type that in. And you can still see that after 18 years, you'll get to 1,477,000 with just the initial investment of £1,000. And the beauty of this calculator is that you can reverse engineer it to find out how much Bitcoin you would need today at a particular CAGR rate to get to your financial goals. So let's do that now. So let's say we've got a time horizon of 10 years and we wanted our portfolio to be worth £1 million at that 10 years. What would the CAGR rate need to be with an initial investment of £1,000 to get to that goal? So let's first initially work out how much Bitcoin we would hold. So we can easily do that by just doing our initial investment divided by, and I've called this cell on this calculator here BTC price. So all I can do is simply type in BTC price, and it will show that £1,000 at today's Bitcoin price is 0.012 Bitcoin. Now the CAGR rate, we have to play around with this. So let's start with 60%. You can see that we've only made £100,000 in 10 years at that particular rate. So let's up it some more. 357, closer. And 10 years, 1,024,000. So we've hit our goal if the CAGR rate is 100%. But what happens if we change the initial investment? How much does that impact our investment and time period to get to that magic 1 million? So let's say we manage to save up £10,000 as our initial investment and hold 0.12 Bitcoin. Now you can see that £1 million is achieved somewhere between years 6 and 7. So you've pretty much halved the time with your initial investment. And that is the impact of stacking sats early while the adoption rate, which we are currently in, is still early. A lot of people will say we are still early, and I fully agree with that. Most people get caught up in the day-to-day price action of Bitcoin and its extreme volatility. But if you zoom out and think of it in terms of long-term growth and wealth generation over time, Bitcoin doesn't need to explode tomorrow to change your life and create generational wealth. All you need to do is stay humble, stack those sats, keep motivated by doing the research and doing the study work behind it. In the last video, I provided several key resources that definitely helped me go from zero knowledge about Bitcoin to be fully invested in this technological revolution. And that's where we're going to leave it today. If you found this helpful, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment if you'd like access to the Reverse CAGR spreadsheet. And as always, thanks for watching. Stack smart, zoom out, and stay focused. See you next time. And as always, you've been briefed.